We all know at some level that loss is part of life, and yet it's one of the things we're least prepared to face. Not just the loss of people, but the loss of certainty, of identity, of the stories we thought would unfold a certain way. So, what happens when we stop avoiding it and start facing it with honesty? Today's conversation is about grief, but more importantly, it's about what grief reveals about how we live. This is part 2 of our Navigating Grief series. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan Peters, psychologist and leadership coach. This show is all about bringing hope, connection, awareness, and wisdom through meaningful conversations that inspire us to be better versions of ourselves and have a positive impact on humanity. This is your space to pause, reflect, and reconnect with who you are, what you care about, and who you want to be. We have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. Today, I have the privilege and pleasure of interviewing Nancy Howard Cobb. Nancy has interviewed poets, writers, and adventurers in print and on public radio. She has spoken about mourning, grief, death, and dying in hospices, medical schools, bookstores, and conferences, and has written for the New York Times, HuffPost, more, and you can find her extensively on her Substack and Instagram. She is the author of In Lieu of Flowers, A Conversation for the Living, which has just been re-released after 25 years. She is a longtime New Yorker, but now lives in San Diego. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've listened to your show, and it's so much about connection, which is what I'm about and you're about. So I know we're
Thank
going
you.
to have a
That
good time.
is what you are about, because I've been listening to you too. It's all about connection for you, and it's all about living. Really, it's all about living for you, which of course is the underside or the I guess the lesson in what we all have to learn about and face grief, death, and dying, something that we cannot get away from in our human experience.
No, it's as I say, we're born and we die. And I've been very specific. Even 25 years ago, I talked about any kind of euphemisms that surround death are not helpful to people who are mourning. We don't, I have a problem with passed away. We
Hmm.
don't pass in and then pass away. We're born and we die. And those are
Yes.
the two bookends and of what we're all going to experience. And I think part of the reason all these euphemisms surround grief and loss is that people are still uncomfortable talking
Mhm.
about it, and they think they're going to soften it somehow by using terms that, I mean, die is just a word like
Yeah.
born.
Yeah.
I mean, so I am pretty much on a one woman campaign to open the conversation, keep it open, say what you need to say. If you need to howl at the moon, do it. Don't let anybody tell you, anybody who says, well, this was God's will or whatever kind of thing people project onto you.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't feel right, walk away. Find some
Yeah.
new friends, honestly.
This is, I have been um, fully immersed in this subject because things seem to come in pairs. And I just interviewed another woman on grief, which you might
Huh.
know her, Dr. Corey Lee. She works with kids and parents primarily. So the language, she's a thanatologist among other things,
Wow.
and so it's exactly what you said. She focuses so much on the words,
Huh.
especially as you have parents talking to kids with the idea of, we talked about like, oh, we lost them. And then,
Ex-
where did they go? And so,
exactly.
and I also think
Exactly.
it's another way that we or try to soften or hide behind the pain or the finality of actually just saying it directly. And from what I know about you, I don't know that you have another mode. You seem to be like someone who says it like it is.
Yeah, I do. I sort of call a spade a shovel sometimes. But my parents were very funny, very direct people, and my particularly my mom. And I think the reason I wrote this book is to honor my parents. I'm a single child, so if you grow up with no siblings, you have no witnesses. And I realized, I mean, this is 25 years ago when my daughter was a kid when I wrote it, and now she is a kid. She has two little kids, and I realized about halfway through, I'm trying to chronicle this and make sense of my grief and bring back these memories in a kind of universal family album. And for some reason, I think that Random House did this. I was so surprised and so delighted that 25 years later, they would do that. Uh, it's that they would publish this. And I have a young editor. My editor died
Mm.
of cancer, and there are not a lot of people there who I worked with. They either left or they're gone and to another house or to wherever, the great beyond. And so I don't really say the great beyond, but you know what I mean. They
I know
died.
what you mean.
And
Yeah.
so anyway, I think by telling a truth, I think people know when you're BSing, and I think there's
Mhm.
something in this book that is really candid, and
Yes.
it's very female. And I think by virtue of giving birth, I understood nursing my mother out of this world. If I do nothing else in my life, I've had great gigs interviewing people, and I've learned so much anecdotally. I have no advanced degrees, particularly I have a degree, but it's in theater, and my degree is in what I've learned from the people I've talked to, whether it's on an airplane or a bus. Obviously, I'm an extrovert, so I've learned so much, and I often ask people, "Hey, what was this like? Well, what did your father die of, and when did he die? How old were you?" And people are so surprised and so enlivened and delighted to be able to talk about it because most people don't. They think
Right.
oh, it's going to make them sad, as if
Mhm.
as
Right.
if of course makes them sad, but it also makes them happy to keep the person out in the world and talk about him or her.
Which is why it makes it about life. I mean, ultimately, as I am seeing this, and so many people, including Katie Couric, who everyone, um, Nancy was just on Katie Couric's Substack interview, which is a great interview, and they have all of these connections together. So Katie wrote, she's on the cover, and I'm just going to read what she said. Here's the book, everybody.
Oh,
Are you
thank you.
watching? Yes. A gift, lyrical, tender, and comforting. This book is about loss, but really it's about life. Reading it was a profound and beautiful experience. And I feel like, first of all, congratulations. I know
Thank
that's
you, Dan. Thank you
amazing
so much.
to get that. As I have had my own experience of leaning into and being less afraid of grief and loss and death, I've realized more and more it is affirming to go in the direction, and it actually does create it gives there's continuity. I think it keeps things real, and we spend so much time hiding and being afraid and avoiding. I'm speaking for the collective, but I'm also speaking of my own experience as well.
You know, when I 25 years ago, I would talk about the word closure that was just ubiquitous. And so I would say I'm on a one woman campaign to get rid of the word closure. I said, well, people don't want closure. If you think about it, what they want is continuity, connection. And because a person dies, it doesn't mean the relationship is over. It's changed, but you are changed by your grief. And so if you begin to, as you begin to heal and you begin to tell the stories, for instance, my daughter was 6 weeks old when my father died, and I talk about Grandpa Ted, this guy who was 6'5" and a war hero and a Cornell football star, and she's a beautiful athlete who's 5'10" and a half, and he would have adored her. And so I would start talking about Grandpa Ted as if he were around. It just she
Mhm.
couldn't see him, but definitely was a part of her life, and she grew up understanding that. And as a result, when she met her husband, um, 15 years ago, it turned out his mother was dying. He lived in Portugal, and she went to visit him, and his mother died 2 days after she got there. so she was able to help the family, and all these things she'd absorbed from me,
Mm,
this snowboarder kid of
mhm,
mine, had this kind of embodied this
mhm,
ability for a very young woman to talk about and feel comfortable around the subject of death,
mm, mhm.
so
You know
I
what's so fascinating about that too? If I could just, and I know you like to be cut off because that's in your
I
genes. Like
do.
cutting each other off is good conversation, right?
You
Yes,
got it.
yes, yeah,
Quoting my mother,
yeah,
Dan.
yeah. I know.
I
I did
think
my
you're
research.
channeling her. Come on.
Yeah. I So just back to Corey Lee, which this is so interesting because she works in grief, and you
Yeah.
have spent a lot of time in grief. So she was always knew she wanted to be in hospitals, working with kids at a young age. And it turned out when I said, well, what did that come from? It's like, oh, my whole family was first responders. And
Oh,
so
wow.
the scanner was always on. And I
Wow.
heard about every, fire, accident, like everything. She was her family was involved in all of the first responding groups and agencies.
Wow.
And so she grew up just with that. And I'm thinking now of your daughter because of what you immersed her in, how she could flow into the help hold people and through the process of dying, of grief, the before, the middle, and the after, because that is what you talked about and what you surrounded her with in her childhood.
Thank you for saying that. And I've actually done a lot of interviews, but I've never quite talked about her and her wisdom that blew me away when she was so young, because my first book was about couples meeting, and it was romantic, and then I did a book that she was sort of a little bit of a part of about kids letter writing, and then she went to a lot of my radio interviews sometimes when they were in the garden in Farmington, Connecticut, and but I mean, she was just starting to be a teenager when I wrote this, and so she would hear me talking in the bookstores. But the wisdom of children, and it's so interesting to hear about Corey. Corey Lee is her name.
Yeah,
I have to look.
Leigh.
Oh, so that's a very
Yeah,
Irish name. No
yeah,
wonder they're
yeah,
all involved. And I'm half of my mother was
yeah.
Irish, so but very interesting to hear that she was just absorbed that and
Mhm, mhm.
understood giving back and healing in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
and that she is doing that work. I really want to look her up now. And what's your experience been with grief?
Well, I shared, I thought you might ask me that, and I shared a little bit that on the other episode. Like, my traumatic grief was the loss of like, the first one was the loss of my grandfather, my mom's dad, when I was 7. And the part of the
Um,
story that I didn't tell, and he was a very big part of my life, our life, the whole family's life, a very close, extended family. Fortunately, shortly after, worked his whole life, had a heart attack in the middle of the night, like shortly after he retired.
oh,
Um, and I remember getting out of bed, running into my parents' room to find my mom where she was supposed to be, getting ready for the day, where she always was at that time. And it was just my dad standing there. And I said, "Where's mom?" And he said, I mean, I remember this vividly. He said, "Something very sad happened last night. Grandpa died." And um, I remember looking at him and saying, "Oh," and just going to my room. And I
oh,
don't know what happened after that, but there was a lot of sadness and a lot of grief and a lot of mourning and group mourning with my mom and her sisters were away at my grandmother's house. And then, as I mentioned, so listeners, excuse me, I'm Nancy's going to help me through this, which is I I just remember being at the celebration after the funeral, and the decision was made for all of us younger grand, grandchildren not to go to the funeral.
mm,
So there was just so many things that were um, hard to understand, of course, as a 7-year-old. And then the part about my mom's mourning, my sensitivity and my connection to her, I couldn't bear her mourning. And so then I was the guy who'd be like, tell my little brother, like, don't mention grandpa, like, because I know anytime it was mentioned for a while because of grieving,
she'd
right?
cry.
Yeah, and that I it hurt me. So
Oh,
that's my like the first moment and what I always go back to. Of course, there have been others, but that's the one that's really been defining for me.
of course, that's your first
Yeah,
primary grief, and you
yeah,
were old enough to remember. 7 is that 6, 7, you really
yeah,
start to remember things. What I really love, Dan, is that your dad said something sad has happened. Your grandfather died very clearly.
yeah. He did
Um,
that. He did that really well in hindsight, didn't he?
if you think about
Yeah,
it, it's
yeah,
so true,
yeah.
and and he left it for you to process. I interviewed William Styron once, and I asked him about, all his different books. What has mattered the most to you? And he said, I think, I can't remember the question. It wasn't a kind of dopey media question, but it was a good question. And he said, it was Darkness Visible, his book about depression, which nobody had really written about. And it's one of those amorphous things like grief that's hard to make, put in a container, if you will. And he said, there was something about that book. I felt a responsibility because he said, people will call me in the middle of the night and I will talk them off the ledge, figuratively, literally off the ledge. And he said, just last week, if somebody called me from Texas with a gun in his lap. And I feel that because he was a child whose mother died, and they said, they did some euphemistic thing. They did not say, your mother died and you're sad. I don't know what they said, but they wouldn't let him go to the funeral. And then his father had a nervous breakdown, and they told him his father was on a business trip. And he said,
Mhm.
I grew up in an Anglo-Saxon Protestant household. I said, you grew up in a different time. I said, I grew up in an Anglo-Saxon Protestant household too. But when you're that much older than I am, and people would really tend to talk in my household. And he said, "You grew up in a time when they didn't tell children things, and he held it down, and that was part of the depression." Which
Mhm.
really came to bear when he was in his 50s. He was an alcoholic, and he was open about it. But I think what we're talking about, really, Dan, everything that we've talked about to this point is about candor,
Yeah,
honesty, authenticity.
yeah.
And kids know
They
if
know.
you're screwing around with them and you're not telling them the truth. And so to put closure or put a blanket over it or pretend everything's fine, you saw your mom and her sister's mourning. That's very moving because
Mhm.
that was your lesson, your
Right,
first lesson.
right. And it just we're not always ready for the lessons, right? It takes time to peel it away, and, like, when I look back now after lots of processing and growing and living, it's like, "Oh, yeah, that all made perfect sense." It's just it takes time, and I wanna go I wanna jump into the candor and the honesty and authenticity because that's something that, as honest as you are, there's something in this book that you became more honest at the end in the afterword about your life and your grief, which is of course well we'll talk about it in a moment, but the lead in is a type of grief that did not result with the death of a person, but as you describe, is even more painful.
Yeah.
And before everyone, that's the first cliffhanger. The second one is I have to read Anne Lamont's quote, which you put in there, of course, which inspired you, which is so beautiful. I went home and I told my wife that after I read it,
Oh,
and we just
I
thought of so many people, like yeah. So here's the quote, everyone: "You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories." And get it, this is the best part. "If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better."
don't you love her.
Love it. I love that.
Did you read Operating Instructions? I
I didn't.
remember.
I did
All
not.
right,
No.
I have read every book of Anne Lamont's, and the first time when I read that, she was so funny and so out there, and so I go back to her for both solace and laughter. And she's just one of the great writers of our time, I think. And she's very spiritual, but she's a rascal. And when she wrote that, I thought, I have to write about this man I was married to for a long time, Leland's father. And it was not, I told her I'm going to do this. And she said, Mom, And I said, I'm not using his name, but I realized the reason I wrote this book is that from the outset of this marriage, I was living with two different people, and he was having affairs. I later found out when I was pregnant with her. So I had what I thought was a really happy marriage. We traveled, we had friends. Um, and so I think also what I wanted to do was say, that it's not just divorce that's the death I'm referring to, but it is unrecognized deceit where
Hmm.
somebody's gaslighting you, and you think, and you're having feelings that something's going on, but you can't quite hold it. It's easier if somebody hits you over the head with a brick. You think, oh, that's a brick, that hurts. But if somebody's messing with your head, you don't know. And so there's this really discomforting thing that's going on, and you're being told something else is happening. So I Katie mentioned it, and I'm thank you for mentioning it, because it took gulp a lot of courage. And I've got this great 26-year-old editor, Lisa Kwan, whom I'm crazy about, and she just an old soul. I don't know. She's 26, and she is sometimes just like my mother. We're like sisters, we're friends, but she's a very wise human being. And there's a kind of I was really touched when Katie brought it up. I'm touched that you're bringing it up, because I realized, yes, I was so devastated when I finally found out all the stuff that had happened, that I realized that was the thing that propelled me toward writing this book. And I said, I'm trained as an actress. When you're an actress, you do someone else's lines. When you're a documentary filmmaker, which I was, you do someone else's story. So it's almost like not trusting your voice. When you interview
Hmm.
people, which was my gig for 20 years, it's their story, not mine. There's a conversation. This is the first thing I've done in the first person. I did articles, like I did articles for More Magazine, and I wrote the whole story of what happened in the marriage in part anonymously because of the Moore lawyers. But it was the issue that sold the most, because Jamie Lee Curtis took off her clothes in that issue, and she was on the cover. This is way too much information. I'm Irish, half Irish. And so but thank you for asking me that, because I realized I was so cracked open by this
Hmm.
devastating experience. And finally brave enough to leave the marriage, brave enough to write this book, and finally 25 years later brave enough to say, you know what, this happened to me, and it had a huge causal effect. But it
Hmm.
also allowed me to get out of Dodge and travel the world. I've lived in India and been to Southeast Asia. I've been everywhere. And he never would have done that. He didn't have the chops for that. So
Hmm.
I'm a vagabond, and I'm a much tougher girl, because I did a lot of Jungian therapy to get my backside out of that marriage.
Well, bravery is courage, bravery, like that. Those are the words that come to me. And I'm curious as to you worked on this. You did all of your Jungian work. You wrote about it anonymously. I'm wondering what the impact of it has been on you to actually write it in first person and have it be out in the world and you being able to talk about it.
Thank you for asking that. It has been an
Mm.
enormous relief to tell the truth, because what it grew out of was someone not telling the truth over and over again. And so uh yeah, so thank you, Dan,
Mhm.
for asking that. This is really the first in-depth uh engagement, if you will, that I've had about this. And you're asking great questions. And yeah, it felt a little scary, and told my daughter, and she was upset. But I thought, this is my story. If I
Mhm.
died tomorrow and I didn't tell the truth about my story, you can't live your life for everybody else, and you can't protect everybody else's feelings. I had to reveal my
Yeah.
own.
Well, and
As long as
yeah,
long as it's not mean spirited, it's just God, honest
right,
truth.
right, right. And I think that's where integrity comes in. Approaching these things with integrity, alignment, and as you said, authenticity. And I I have found we for lots of different reasons we over time start to live, we start to have small acts of self-betrayal,
Huh.
not intentionally, but when we are, going with the program, we're saying yes when we mean no. We're
Mm,
protecting someone else's bad behavior for a variety of reasons. And over
mm,
time, um, there's an additive effect. And
yeah.
I remember this quote. I don't know who said this, but I found it maybe in middle school or high school, and it has stayed with me. And it's something like, I never tell a lie because that way I don't have to remember anything. And I have found, to me, it speaks to what truth is and
Yeah.
authenticity is, because when we're holding things or fudging things, because there's some reason, there's a micro personal cost that happens. But when we can really be free and liberated and just speak our truth, like you said, without an intention to harm, um, I don't know, freeing, liberating, I don't even think those words do it justice, when it's like living fully as one is.
Yeah. Thank you. Gosh, this is such a pleasure to talk to you. And you're so aware. One of your words is awareness. I wrote it down last night. Hope, connections, awareness, and wisdom, which I really like. But you live it. You're walking the walk, talking the talk, and I am so appreciative that we can talk about this, especially man to woman. I think that there are a lot of women who are very angry at men, and I like men. I've always liked men, and um I don't feel bitter. I felt angry for a long time, but then, that doesn't do you any good. That, there's a line like anger devours its own cartons. So you better,
Mm.
clear out the carton, figure it out. But to be able to really name this is so freeing,
Mhm.
to go back to the question you
Yeah,
asked. So
I'm glad.
so
Yeah,
thank you so
yeah,
much.
yeah. The other saying that you just made me think of is, from AA, a definition of resentment, which many people have heard, which is resentment is like taking a poison pill and hoping the other person dies.
Yes, I've heard that, which is such a great line.
Right. Like,
It's so
how
true.
do we get this out, right? How do we
Right.
not take on what is not ours?
Right.
And at the same time, process through what we need to, all these traumas and these hurts that we go through. We are all connected, and the energy is passed on, is felt
Mhm.
in our collective, in our communities. And it's impacting lots of people. I mean, there's lots of people who I talk to, and when they say, I'm not even consuming media, I'm staying away, from as much as I can right now
I know.
for healthcare. They say, and I still feel off. I still feel on edge. I still feel sad, and we're all connected to all of that's going on. And I feel like, sometimes it would be nice to be not to, but that's not how it works. And
It
I
isn't.
think we're all feeling it.
We're all feeling it, and we're connected as human beings. And I also feel some confusion, and that often happens when someone dies. You feel off balance. You feel, and this collective grief we're talking about now. You're off balance. You're sad. You have to be careful when you're driving your car. I drive up to see my kids. Are about an hour north of here, in north of San Diego, and there are so many angry people on the highway, on the freeway here, that I keep thinking there is, and the guys lane splitting and their motorcycles, you can feel the agitation on the road, and you just want to give everybody, a hug and say, I hope we're gonna get through this. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a time in my life. I'm older than you are, and it's a time, and I've never experienced
Mhm.
anything like this. So
Well, in terms
I'm
of getting through grief,
yes,
as you say, all the stories that you gathered, I love this. They're stamps on your grief passport. So
yeah.
not only have you, endured your own, losses, you were front row to many. What do we do? How do we get through grief?
You know, it's Katie and I were talking about that. I said it's a little bit like you have this backpack, and you keep putting some stones in it. The older you get, the more people you know who are dying. And my daughter has friends. She's young, but she's got friends who've died. And this is again, it's part of life. It's not because we're living longer, by and large. We, y- you, I just think until you're really hit with it, like you were with your grandfather, but that was the first little pebble in your pocket. And then you probably had more since then. And it's something we carry with us, just as we carry our grief for the rest of our lives. You can't, it's not something you get over or you need closure. You go through it and you put on your waders, and sometimes you're ambushed. A year or two later, you hear a song that your mother loved, or some perfume that somebody has on the train next to you, and you're in tears. And as I was telling Phil, your great
Yes. Our
uh
engineer.
partner. Yeah, he's a very cool engineer. And I was telling him I'm half Irish and half WASP. And I say that. And then I sort of kid and say, well, I don't know if that makes me bipolar, but the Irish part of me, cries at parades or if I hear a bagpipe. And I remember that Pat Moynihan, the senator, said, if you're Irish, eventually the world is going to break your heart. And, to live with a broken heart is what we're all going to have to face at some point in our lives. Some people have much more than others. I can't imagine, what it's like in these war-torn countries to try to just get a meal together, or, to have lost all your children and your wife. And I just can't imagine it. Honestly,
Mhm,
I just can't imagine it. And part of me just wants to get into bed and put the covers over my head. And
mhm.
if you need to do that, do it. And also, I agree with staying away from this toxic media, but to also in our day-to-day engagement in the world, I always talk to whomever it is, the clerk in the store, the postman, and say, how's it going? And often, I'm old enough now, so it doesn't seem like I'm flirting with men, but I'll just say, oh, you're so handsome. We had this great bartender the other night. I said, God, you look like a movie star. And then I thought, is that inappropriate? But it makes people feel good, whatever that is. You just have to tell your truth in the moment as you see it and not edit yourself, so you don't edit you're you're not inappropriate or unkind, but you're paying attention to somebody and looking eye to eye as we are now, even though we're on a screen. And a lot of people have their faces in screens, which, as we know, is not a healthy thing.
Right,
So
right.
we need to engage. As I said, I lived in New York during 9/11, and so I would walk the streets and you'd look at people. I mean, I'd come down and hug. I was living in a really nice building and I loved all my doormen, and I just come down and hug them in the morning, every morning for like a month, or I'd walk over to the fire station. And that's just who I am. I'm a little bit I'm I don't know, I'm a little bit forward, I guess. That's my
That's
jam.
a good
That's how I
that's a good
roll.
word for it. You're a little bit forward in a great way. And,
Thank you.
I mean, and this is I guess when we think of continuums, like the two, say too much or say too little. And what I've heard and learned and read about when it comes to the topic of grief and of loss, more is better than less, because what a lot of people do is we don't know. And I've been there. I was there a lot of times. Like, you don't know what to say, so you don't say anything.
Yeah,
And yes, you're going to sometimes say something which might not be taken well, because I've also heard from people in the depths of grief, there's like nothing someone can say that's going to actually land, that's going to help that
right.
feeling. But
Right.
what would you say about the say less versus say more if you don't know what to say?
I think that, I mean, I was really surprised when I wrote this 25 years ago. A college friend of mine said, God, I just feel so awkward. I never know what to say, so I don't say anything. And this friend of mine's son was killed. And she said when she went back to the office 2 months later, she saw people ducking into their offices so to avoid her. because they didn't know what to say. And you have to say, just, I'm so sorry. Can I get you a cup of tea? Don't say, what can I do for you? Just do it. Just
Mhm.
bring in 4 apples
Mhm.
and 2 bananas and, something that is a gift of from the heart. I think words often, I think as my mother was dying in hospice, I realized because she'd lost her memory, but she was really had one foot in this world and foot in the other. And she had this beatific look on her face. And her last words were she looked up and she said, faces, see the faces. And I said, it must be dad, Mom. And she just said, I'm so happy. This woman who hadn't talked for 3 years. And I realized at that moment that we were communicating at such a fundamental level the last couple of weeks of my mother's life that language is a kind of clunky earthbound device as while someone is dying. After someone dies, it's all we've got, along with a couple of apples and a cup of tea. But how we come genuinely to a person is so important. There's a point, and when I wrote this 25 years ago, I said, why is it easier for us to be mourning this beautiful princess who's killed in a car in a French tunnel rather than going down to the block to the neighbor whose husband is dying of emphysema because he was a firefighter or whatever?
We've got to suck it up.
Suck it up is what we have to do, and just be a grown up,
Yeah.
be a person who's going to, and if we have children, then it behooves us to set the example, not to pretend or not to do whatever it is that we're telling our children. You've got to live what you believe. And I
Hmm.
just, grief for some people is just, it takes as long as it does. For a while there, people would just think it would be the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 steps. And of course, it's messy. Sometimes you're pissed. Sometimes you're sad. Sometimes you just can't stop crying.
Hmm.
Sometimes you don't want to talk to anybody for a month. Fine, don't, you
Hmm.
know? And the person will let you know if you're an aware person, if you're a person who has perspective, if you're, you talk about awareness, you can read somebody's, it's like, I can't talk to anybody right now about this,
Hmm.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what have you found to
Well, I,
be?
I was just actually thinking, sorry, of a situation of where there was a member of our community who died now over a year ago. And I saw his wife shortly after we had learned it happened. And he had a chronic terminal illness. And I ran into her and a friend at the hardware store. And I thought when I got out of the car, I thought I saw her walk in out of the corner of my eye, but I wasn't sure. And I certainly wasn't going to go look for her. And of course, I turn an aisle, and there she is, right,
Yeah, of
face to face,
course.
face
Of
to
course.
face. And I just looked at her, and I didn't really have time. I didn't have time to think, and I just locked eyes with her, and I saw like the sadness in her eyes, and I just said, "Can I give you a hug?"
Oh, good for you.
And it just kind of happened, and she allowed me to, and I did, and we had a very short conversation. But I realized in hindsight, like, there weren't any words. There
No.
weren't any words, and so I just think it is about trying to just meet the person where they are with whatever you've got in the moment. Like, we
Yeah.
can't read minds. We don't know. Again, there's no, like, there's some wrong things to say. We do know that, but there's
Yeah.
not a lot of right things. I mean, so,
Yeah.
like, just be real, right?
Yeah.
Just be real. And
Well,
another
it's
thing,
just,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, another memory I have is a friend and colleagues years ago. Um, Mom had passed not that long ago, and then another colleague came. He had lost his mom, and I was the one who didn't know really what to say, right? So I was the one who was back then saying less than I believe I should have.
Hmm.
I remember when they saw each other for the first time, and he just said, "You know what? That really sucks." And he goes, "That really sucks." And then I think they hugged. But I was like, huh. Like that
Yes.
was so simple and so real. Like it was just so
Yeah.
real. This like you don't have to come up with this articulate like thing. So
No, actually, those are both great examples. The hug, because that's always my instinct. I happen to hug everybody already, so I'll often ask, but sometimes I just do it. But that's was such a wonderful revelatory moment for you to hear this and go, yeah, you know what? It does suck. And uh, again, the truth, will set you free or
mhm.
make you feel better. And I'm sure that woman welcomed
Yeah,
your arms around her.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
really it's a short run here. And we might as well do the best we can
yeah.
and say what we can when we in the moments that we have, because sometimes you don't get second chances. And one of the things I do say is that if you're lucky enough to be with someone as they are dying,
Mhm.
sing to them, hold their hand, you know, uh, talk to them, because, if look what happened 9/11. I mean, people went off to work and that was it. Unless you've got a phone call,
Right.
it's just you just don't know
No.
when it's going to happen. So I tell people that I even just sort of like, sometimes I'll just go, I love you when I leave, because you never know if you're not going to see them again. I think it's because I've been talking about this subject for so long. I
Yeah.
realize, just say it, because even if it makes them feel a little, well, I mean, I'm not sure I love you, but that's okay. It's okay. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's really a luxury, and to be around someone on a deathbed is a sacred
Mm,
time
mm,
for the dying and the living. And one of the things I do say in the book, it gives the living a final chance to be the best that they can be.
mm.
And even if you don't get it right and you never think you got it right, oh, why didn't I say, or why didn't regret this, that?
Right.
You can go through the if onlys and they'll drive you mad. But basically, to be with someone is a sacred event. And
Mhm,
we're finally beginning to understand that.
mhm.
Um, you know, we're
Yeah.
finally beginning to understand that with end of life movements and what people are beginning to treat departures like we treated our arrivals.
Right. Something that has helped me over the years become more comfortable, I guess at first from less fearful, then to more comfortable with the idea of death is an openness to um, all that we do not know, right? All of the, all of the mysteries,
Mysteries.
right? All the mysteries. And where I'm going with this is you interviewed lots of people who had these signals, these signs. I know you, um, the praying mantis is one that
Yeah.
had been in your life, and so talk a little bit about the signs and what you've seen those signs do for people.
Well, when I first started doing the book, I would talk to people, and I'd had some experiences, couple of experiences with my father's spirit that I write about in the book. And when my daughter and she was only 18 months, and we were sleeping in this big four-poster bed that he had slept in as a boy. But as I began to talk to people, I realized, wow, they're having these experiences with hawks and hummingbirds, and so I finally said to Dan Frank, that my beloved editor, who unfortunately died at 68, and I said, Dan, I think I'm just going to have to number these or put bullet points. I can't make it into a cohesive bunch of paragraphs, because it's just like one person after another. And what people would often say, they'd always start with this: I know this will sound crazy, but after my sister died, a bluebird came in and flew on, or somebody who was 200 miles inland, whose father had been a sailor. And she said, I know this is going to sound crazy, But my mother opened the door and there was a seagull on the front step. And so I began to interrupt people, which is, I want to do, and say, do not say it's crazy. Here's what's crazy that you and I started. I say this all the time as a sperm and an egg, and suddenly 9 months later, you get us. That's crazy. That's totally crazy. But a bluebird flying in after your sister dies, you say, what is this feathered creature trying to tell me? What is this? This mourning dove flew in the kitchen. They're very shy, and I've been watching a pair of them. If you look up mourning doves, literally mourning, and they have this soft coo and they're kind of quiet, but she came right into the kitchen. I'm sitting in the kitchen and I opened this door and I said, it's okay. You can go out this door. And she stayed on the wall. Now, I have learned to pay more attention to these things. I've learned to tell people to look for them and to pay attention. And every time I sign a book or talk to a person, I hear a story like this. The Julia Child, it was a friend, and she was very matter of fact. There's an article I have about her and traveling with her on my website, and I said, "Well, Julia," because when I met her, Paul, her husband, had been diminished by a series of strokes and was in a assisted living facility. And I said, well, when you dream about Paul, Julia, do you dream about him as he was as a younger man and more vital, or do you dream about him now as he is infirm? And she said, oh, dearie, I don't dream. I don't dream. I said, of course you do. We all dream. And she said, well, I don't. She was very concrete in many ways. But we became friendlier as we spent time together over a decade, really. She was like my daughter's grandmother and very funny. And we both had Republican fathers, and we were both very liberal women. And after Paul died, she would call him every day. But after he died, this clematis vine that she planted, or some vine, and he planted, and he was a master gardener and painter. He tried to get it to bloom for 42 years and it never bloomed. The 2 days after he died, it bloomed. The whole damn thing bloomed. And I said, Julia,
Wow.
what do you think of that? And she said, well, I thought he just looked down and said, God damn it, bloom. And it did. And Julia
Wow.
would talk about dying. She had Paul's ashes on the ironing board in her kitchen in Cambridge forever. And she just was a good friend. Her editor, Judith Jones, was my champion, introduced me to Dan, which is how it's all a beautiful web of amazing people who aren't here anymore. But she became, as she was getting closer to the end, she really became more spiritual in a way. And
Mm.
we used to really talk more philosophically, and it was wonderful. We sort of grew up together, in a way. We were very different people, but we became very close. I didn't mean to go off on that.
That's a great story. That's a great story. And instead of the praying mantis, we have the blooming clematis.
Clematis,
Yes,
yeah,
like that. But that is, how about that? That is what we're talking about, right? A message, a sign, like something where it can open us up to the greater than,
yeah,
not the finite, but the infinite.
absolutely beautifully said. And the kind of ephemeral, elemental mystery and magic of the universe and of nature. Paul Moore, no, Paul Moore, the theologian, said, I think we would be better if we looked more closely at the world around us and paid more attention to nature. I mean, there's so many birds here in this backyard in San Diego where I live. They're just yellow footed orioles and hummingbirds, and then I hadn't seen these mourning doves, and here they were. So I sometimes think, is that you, Mom, or who is that? And I'll start talking,
Hmm.
and I'll probably get dottier as I get older, but I think that we need to allow for magic. We need to allow for the kind of um, unusual circumstances. It's not crazy. It's really it's the universe telling us something, whatever you believe, God, Buddha,
Yeah,
the divine
yeah,
feminine, which I think we need a little more of these days. And
yeah.
I
How
Let
has
me,
this journey? How has this journey? 25 years. Who like what? How has this journey changed you? Right, the privilege of being a part of these lives, of writing about it, of speaking everywhere about them, and now again, round two. How have you been transformed by this experience?
what a great question. You have some great questions, Dan. Thank you. Um, it's made me braver about saying what needs to be said, going toward what needs to be done, not feeling awkward. I mean, when I started writing this book, it was I just am. I've always been a little cheeky, but it's made me really aware of other people, and it's made me ask the hard questions, what seem like the hard questions, but people are so grateful to answer them and to talk about them, but we need to take the time to do that. So I think this has been, it's what I said. This is every time I hear a story, it's like a stamp on my mourner's passport. And
Hmm.
this kid I met from Mogadishu was so beautiful. He was just like a beautiful human being. And at this point, he was about 18, but he'd been in Mogadishu, but now he was in Milwaukee behind the Alamo counter. That's how I met him. And he said, "What do you do?" This is back in the days when, before cell phones. And I was writing, and he said, "Well, where do you work?" And I said, "Oh, I work in my attic at home. And I'm a writer." He said, "What do you write about?" And I said, "Oh, nothing you'd be interested in. It's grief and death." And he got this look on his face. And I said, immediately I assumed, I said, "Did someone die? Did your grandmother die?" And then he tells me the story of being in a soccer match in Somalia, in Mogadishu, and his they finished the game, they won the game, and his soccer chum lived at, 2 blocks from the field. And all of a sudden random sniper's bullet hit his pal and killed him. And he carried him home. And he said, "Do you know, I couldn't talk for 2 months. I couldn't I couldn't say a word. I forgot about that he said that. And he was so wise. And sometimes people can't see. Sometimes people go blind for a bit. You
Hmm.
just don't know the sensory effect that these things are going to have on you. And so he was my youngest teacher, but I'll tell you, I've had so many teachers, and I've been so lucky that Judith championed this, got me to Dan. This fellow, Sunny Mehta, did not want to do this book, and we pushed for it, and somehow we got it through the like threading a needle. And I think this is supposed to be my work. I think this has
This
become my varsity sport, you
this
know?
this is your varsity sport, and it's needed now more than ever, which is why it's out there again with some new information in the beginning and some new information at the end, and you as the ambassador, 25 years wiser.
Oh, thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a gift. It's a real gift. It's a surprise. Having moved out here from New York, I thought, well, what am I going to do now? The radio people I work for back east, all that's all in the past. So I
Yes.
really, really feel very privileged. I'd like to do what you do, but I'm too much of a technophobe at getting onto this thing every day. It drives me
Yeah, that's why you
crazy.
need a fill. Thank you, Phil.
I need
That's
a
why you
fill.
need
I
a
told
fill. You
Phil
need a
that.
fill. You need a fill. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you're talking about this. The book is out. I'll hold it up again for
Yeah. Hold
everyone.
it up. Hold it up.
Beautiful cover.
And
Book,
and
people.
and
Yeah.
you need to know this cover, and I'll hold it up
Yes.
too,
Yes.
because uh, I write about one of the reasons I wrote the book, that not only did my parents die, but one of my very close friends, who was a twin, was dying of breast cancer at a very young age. And so that was another reason I did this book, because we were around hospice people, these beautiful women who had come to her house in Connecticut. And so this new cover is the painting of her twin sister, who is 80 now and lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And her name is
Wow.
Carol Anthony. And Elaine's paintings were very fierce, and she'd lived in Mexico City for a time, and they were very abstract and kind of wild and colorful and banded with steel. And Carol's are very romantic and mystical. And so her painting really works on this book, and it just feels like a full, beautiful circle.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to start singing
Beautiful.
from The Lion King if you don't watch out.
I love that song. tell tell everyone where they can find out what you're doing, who you're talking
Okay.
to, what you're writing, and all of that.
Well, thank you. I'm right now I'm shamelessly promoting this book.
Yeah.
I'm about to leave for France for almost a month with another friend who's a writer, and we're going to do a retreat. And I'm working on a new book called I Always Talk to Strangers. So, which
You
I
do.
do.
I
And
know you do.
my editor said, I said, "What do you think of that title?" She said, "Oh, I really like it." So I think I have another book in me, and I'm on Substack now. I told Katie when I did the interview, I said, "Oh, that's really nice, Katie, that you're doing this, because I think I have 4 followers on Substack. If I could stay off all media, all social media, and write letters, I would be much happier. But anyway, I'm doing this now, and I have now 240 followers on Substack. So I decided I'd keep a little daily journal in France. I'm going to pretend I'm from Canada when I'm over there. Because I'm so
That's probably wise. That's
Je
probably
suis
wise.
Canadienne,
Yeah,
oui.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm going to be doing a lot of apologizing, but I thought it'd be fun and interesting as I talk to people over there and see how we're viewed and just try to do that either on Substack. I'm also on Instagram. My birth name is Nancy Howard Cobb. That's my real name that I was born with because anyway, I took my whole name back and I've always kept it, but I used my middle name because there's another Nancy Cobb who is also a Random House author. And she has this real bubble haircut. And one day she was on my sort of Random House site and I went, "Who is that?" So I took back my middle name. This is way too much information, but
Nancy Howard Cobb, everyone. Nancy
exactly.
Howard
And
Cobb.
I'm on Instagram. I'm on it's Nancy in Conversation, which is my, another handle I have because I did so much radio. And I really, really have enjoyed talking to you. You're such a good interviewer and you're
Oh,
so
thank
kind
you.
and you have a great smile and you're very present. And one of the things I really like about your interviewing is you have no prepared questions. You just spring off from whatever we're talking about, which to me is the art of a good interview. And you've got
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Coming from you, a seasoned guru. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy says it real. She says it with candor. She says it with honesty. And she makes us lean into the hard things that make life more full. Here are 5 key takeaways from our conversation. Number 1, grief doesn't need softening, it needs truth. When we stop hiding behind euphemisms, we create space for real healing and connection. Number 2, there is no closure, only continuity. Relationships don't end when someone dies, they evolve, live on, and shape us forward. Number 3, honesty is liberation. Whether in grief or life, telling the truth without harm, but without hiding, frees us in ways nothing else can. Number 4, say something, do something, show up. You don't need perfect words. A hug, a simple, "that really sucks," or a cup of tea can mean everything. Number 5, grief is the cost of being alive and the proof that we've loved. It's not something we get over, it's something we carry, integrate, and ultimately let deepen our humanity. Well, everyone, none of us get out without grief. And this is a part of our lives that it's so important to be open to lean into, to surrender to. and to keep learning and talking and connecting. Because as Nancy talks about, 25 years later, we all go on with the same losses. We keep growing, we keep changing, and life keeps happening. And it's the grief and the death and the loss of those we love that continue to shape us. So let's keep them alive. Let's talk about our own loss with others. And let's keep showing up, being real, transparent, and honest. Thanks for being a part of this amazing community, for being a part of these really important and intimate conversations. Community is everything, connection is everything, and we can do all of this together. We have this moment, this day, and this life. Let's make it a great one. This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Make It a Great One with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Uplifting Folk by Awesome Music. Artwork by Kelly Dwyer. Follow us on social media at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, visit drdanpeters.com.